Okay. ठीक है. Please join.
Good evening. This is John.
Good evening, John Saab. How are you? Welcome to Indian Muslims for Progress and Reforms webinar.
Thank you. I can
I
see the
also-
general. Good evening, General.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. So we are waiting for some more respected members of IMPAR join. As soon as they join, we can start the deliberation of this webinar.
Anytime.
So,
Assalamu alaikum. Good evening,
Assalam,
Mr.
General
John
sir.
Dayal.
Good evening, General. How are you?
I can't hear. If you can hear me, I am not getting the audio.
Javed Sab, Assalamu alaikum.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
वालेकुम सलाम. वालेकुम सलाम.
Assalamu alaikum. Khalid Sab, I hope you can hear me.
Ansari, I'm not getting the audio.
Sir, this is a problem at your end. Otherwise, audio is all right. Please check your mic.
It's all open.
Javed
sir.
Sab, can you hear me? Javed Sab, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Tell him to unmute. Tell Javed to unmute. Tell
Okay.
Javed Yunus.
We can start the meeting, the webinar. So I welcome all the respected members of the steering committee of IMPAR, the members of the executive committee, and all the members of the functional groups of IMPAR. I also invite and all the participants in this webinar. I welcome Dr. John Dayal Saab. John Dayal Saab does not need any introduction, and he is one of India's foremost voices on human rights, and particularly the situation of the religious minorities. He is an activist, writer, researcher, occasional documentary filmmaker. He is former president of All India Catholic Union, president of United Christian Action, as well as co-founder and secretary general of All India Christian Council, and he is a spokesperson of the United Christian Forum. Dr. John Dayal has written and published several books which are For Reason of State, Delhi Under the Emergency, Shah Commission, A Matter of Equity, Interrogating Indian Secularism, Dismantling India, Reconciliation, A Journey Through a Wounded India, Educating India, A Response to Modi Government's Education Policy. Currently, he is researching a book on liberalism in India and also on Islamophobia in India. Now, I invite Dr. Zamiruddin Shah Saab, who is a steering committee member of IMPAR, to start this meeting.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. Dr. John Dayal, Dr. M.J. Khan, Mr. K. Rahman Khan, brothers and sisters. I am from a conservative Muslim family, and I started my education in a madrasa, but subsequently I went off under the care of Irish Christian Brothers at St. Joseph's College, Nainital. From there, as a 15-and-a-half-year-old boy, I joined the NDA and was commissioned in my teens. So I lived all my life amongst non-Muslims. My first interaction with Muslims was at Aligarh Muslim University, of course in my family, but publicly with at Aligarh Muslim University. So I've met cross sections of all communities in great detail. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, each community has its share of jigwes. Each community has its share of people who don't think well of others. But let me tell you, that the vast majority of all communities are good and law-abiding people and peaceful people. What are the problem areas? The problem areas is, number one, is that religion is being used for political purposes. Second, polarization is being done for electoral advantage. And unfortunately, the social media and TV channels are churning out this poison day in and day out. I'm convinced that the essence of Hinduism is inclusiveness, and the essence of Islam and Christianity is peace. That means there's so much in common. Unfortunately, none of the religions are speaking out against intolerance and violence. All religions, their teachings, essential essence of all is tolerance and non-violence, and this we must understand. I would like to stress that there's no contradiction between my love for my religion and love for my country. In fact, both loyalties are intertwined and complementary. That is something which we've got to understand. The interests of both the religion and the country are intertwined and complementary. What are the socio-economic challenges which we face? I will not go into great detail, but I've listed a few. One is political marginalization of various communities. I would say that the Muslim community has been totally marginalized. Second is poverty. The bulk of our people are living in ghettos and are extremely stricken by poverty. That means we are ghetto stricken. We have to survive in the ghettos. We lack education. I think that is the major socio-economic problem of the community. And the worst is the inter-religious divide. Not only that, even amongst the Muslims and Christians, we have this problem of casteism. This is something which our religions do not abide by, but we've adopted some very, very negative practices. I will not speak further. I'll leave it to Dr. John Dayal, who I know very well, and his fight for the underprivileged people of all communities. I will end up by a quote from Martin Luther King. What he says is very relevant. He says, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness." I'll repeat again, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. So that's all I have got to say. I'm very, very grateful for allowing me to speak. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, General Zamiruddin Saab, for your very valuable remarks. Now I invite Mr. Faizi Hashmi Saab, who is an ex-IAS officer and former Secretary, Cooperation and Civil Supplies, Government of India. Mr. Faizi Hashmi. Mr. Faizi Hashmi Saab, are you there? Sir, please unmute your mic, Faizi Saab.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I was saying, why don't we begin with ladies? Now that the inaugural has been made by Siddiqui Saab, Zamir Saab, can we hear the ladies first?
Yes, no problem. I invite Naz Asghar ma'am. So,
Yeah, because I haven't heard them either.
yes, yes. Naz Asghar is editor of India News
After the ladies, I'll come out.
committee. So I invite Naz Askarji. Ma'am, you are there? So in the meantime, I'll request Shubha Aslam Family, who is the writer, researcher, journalist, and also a member of our committee.
What is the name?
Shubha Aslam Fahmy.
Okay. Sure.
Hello, everyone. And thank you, Khalid Saab, and thank you, Faizi Saab, for thinking of women first. In fact, whenever I hear Mr. John Dayal on television and I read him in newspapers and otherwise, I always feel that may his tribe increase, may his tribe, inundate this whole country, and we have more people talking about the tolerant traditions of the every faith that are existing in our soil, and particularly the kind of efforts are being made in the West about the interfaith diplomacy, interfaith cultural diplomacy that is not being taken here. So I always feel that we need more of people like John Dayal Saab. It's really very proper for IMPAR to have him with us and talk about how are we going to deal with the new normal. And when I say new normal, I just don't mean about the political situation that I am not talking about. I'm talking about the kind of resentment, the kind of restlessness, the kind of sense of deprivation people across the board from all faith are going to have. And then as we have seen that it has happened in Germany, it has happened earlier also, that after this great economic depression comes a kind of, sentiment that people are looking for scapegoats. And this is a very dangerous situation that India is also facing at the moment. A pandemic is going to be, superseded by the economic depression. We are almost already there. Since last 2-3 quarters of the economic growth, we have been seeing the decline. The decline continues, and it is going to deepen. It is going to increase. So how are we preparing to face this? This is my concern. And there are many organizations outside India that are working on the basic common denominators of each faith to come together. And organizations like Alliance of Virtue, there are other organizations that are exploring the commonalities and that basic minimum that can bring us together with the best of the practices from each faith. In India, where it is needed the most, we hardly see many such efforts being taken up, particularly by the Muslim community, I would say. I think John Dayal Saab has some experience on these issues, and he has been trying and talking about these issues. So John Dayal Saab, आप हमें इस बारे में भी enlighten करिएगा आज कि ये हिंदुस्तान में मुमकिन क्यों नहीं हो पाया है. शुक्रिया.
बहुत शुक्रिया शिल्पा जी, और मैं दरख्वास्त करूंगा कि रहमान खान साहब जो हमसे बाद में जुड़े हैं और वो अपने पेश करें. Introduction to former union as well as ex-UP chairman. रहमान साहब, आपका माइक अनम्यूट कर लीजिए.
Good evening to everybody. John Dayal sir, good evening, and I'm happy to interact with you. We have been interacting for several years together on the same subject. Now, coming to today's subject, social political challenges, interfaith dialogue. Now, let me talk about social and political challenges today in India. I go back to the prediction of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar while he was addressing the Roundtable Conference in 1930 and representing the depressed class. He said, I agree that in some respect, the position of the depressed class is similar to that of the minorities in India. The depressed class and the other minorities fear that under any future constitution of India, by which the majority rule will be established, and there can be no shadow of doubt that the majority rule will be rule of the Orthodox Hindus. There is a great danger of that majority with its Orthodox Hindu belief and the prejudices contravening the dictates of the justice, equality, and good conscience. There is a great danger that the minorities may be discriminated against either in the legislation or in the administration or in the public rights of citizenship. Now, Dr. Ambedkar predicted as early as 1930. And today we are facing the same situation what he has predicted. Now, now we are talking about interfaith dialogue. When the prejudices are deliberate, it is not misunderstanding. But this has been, I quoted Dr. Ambedkar, his address to Roundtable Conference. It's not my view. So the Muslims of India trusted, and again, Dr. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and Dr. Vallabhbhai Patel, while debating on the minority rights and whether a separate electorate is required or not, in the draft constitution, there was and Dr. Ambedkar brought that there was a separate electorate, but it was turned down. And while addressing the Constitutional Assembly, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and Vallabhbhai Patel asked the Muslim to trust the Constitution, and we trusted the Constitution. And at the end, what we got? Discrimination. So in this denial of right, and everything what Dr. Ambedkar predicted is happening today. So I agree there should be interfaith dialogue. I agree there should be dialogue with every section of the society. But how do we go ahead? Because how do we go ahead in a deliberate attempt and deliberate feeling that they are doing it deliberately, not by mistake, but not by miscommunication. Dialogue is successful when there is a communication gap, when we have not communicated with them. So, Mr. Dayal, I would like to know your reaction to Dr. Ambedkar, why he didn't insist what he said, both not only in Roundtable Conference, in his book, The State of Minorities and Their Rights, another book he has written in 1946 and presented a memorandum draft constitution to the Constitution Assembly before he became the chairman of the drafting committee, that he has expressed the same doubt, and in the draft constitution, he has provided adequate safeguards for the minorities, because without that safeguard, the democracy has no meaning. So why Dr. Ambedkar, when he holds the definite view on the rights of the minorities, why he has not taken adequate step to safeguard the minorities, or there is a compulsion on him also to agree? This is what I want to know, and what is the way ahead for these minorities? There should be way forward. Way forward is submission is the way forward, is the question which we have to pose today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Now, we have with us Dr. Khwaja Shahid, sir, who is former registrar Jamia Millia Islamia.
Thank you. Thank you, Khalid Saab. Thank you very much. And my regards to all the speakers, particularly John Dayal Saab, who is present here. I have initially to say that I agree with whatever has been said by my previous speakers, but I would like to express on 2 points which are bothering me, particularly on this interfaith dialogue. One is, interfaith dialogue should not remain confined to religious issues. And it should, as today's topic suggests, should move on to socio-political and socio-economic issues also. So I suggest that this name should be changed from interfaith to inter-socio-economic group dialogue or inter-socio-political group dialogue, which Mr. Rahman Khan is also suggesting and also suggesting. That's one of the points which I want to put before this panel, before this group, that we should go beyond religious interfaith or in religious belief or rituals dialogue. The point two, which always comes to my mind, and I want this panel to discuss, is that what Mr. Rahman Khan said is deliberate misrepresentation. To my mind, is a lot because of misunderstanding, a lot because lack of knowledge, a lot because of lack of understanding of each other. My interaction with non-Muslim families, non-Muslim friends, non-Muslim circles, is that there is a lot of gap between the understanding between non-Muslim, including Christians and Muslims, including Muslims and Hindus, and Muslims and other groups and Sikhs, etc., etc. Now, there are a lot of things which believing about the history, and in this atmosphere, the political groups deliberately, for the sake of the political gain or electoral gain, adds on and make use of this situation where there is lack of information, lack of communication. So we should identify the facts, basic facts about each other, and must know about each other more and more. Some of us may be lucky enough, some of us may be learned enough, educated enough to know about each other, but vast majority of people do not know about Hinduism, vast majority of Hindus do not know about Islam or Christianity whatsoever. We live more on rhetorics, we live more on whatever has been spread on social media, etc., etc. So this dialogue should move on to really at the grassroots level. My submission is, and I expect from Mr. John Dayal and others to please ponder about it, that this interfaith dialogue or intergroup dialogue should move on from institutional level to interpersonal level, to one-to-one level, in mohalla to mohalla, in family to family, in one-to-one, to friends to friend. And we must know about each other, explain to them. Then only I think we can win over. Now, point next, which I would like to highlight and flag, because there's a paucity of your time, I don't want to go into details, but point next, which I want to highlight is that there are certain issues between the communities, and there are real issues. Whether we agree, we do not agree, but there are real issues, and these issues are maybe based on ignorance, or maybe based on deliberate propaganda, etc., etc. These issues are that each community feels, or each group feels, or each religious group or community, whatever words you want to use, that I am better than other. I am okay, you are not okay. If that is the approach, if we go ahead with this approach, then my religion is better, your religion is not better, my practices are better, my rituals are better, I don't think there can be any meaningful communication or any meaningful interfaith or inter-community dialogue. So we have to give up this attitude that I am the best, you are not the best, and we go with this arrogance of I am being best and others are not being. I have said in many other groups, whenever the interfaith dialogue is discussed, that if every Muslim has to go with the feeling that my religion is the best religion, others is not the best religion, I don't think he's going with a sincerity for an interfaith dialogue, inter-community dialogue. This approach has to give up. Then only we can have an inclusive interfaith dialogue. Next point which I want to highlight is there are issues, and there are issues which we have to bring into this dialogue. Issue is that, for example, the issue is that Islam and Christianity, which I otherwise has told Mr. John Dayal also and some other people, Islam and Christianity are the religion, and I may allow to call them Tablighi Mazhab. They are politicizing religion. They spread. So therefore, there are missionaries, there are Tablighi Jamaats, there are Dawahs and things like that. And Hinduism is not a politicizing religion. I'm talking this here in the context of Hinduism versus Christianity and Islam, particularly in the Indian context. So they feel that these two religions, these two communities, because of their politicization approach, because of their approach, they are the best, they are the better, others are sinners, they want to spread their population. They want to spread the number and use this number for political purposes or whatever reasons otherwise. Now, this politicization approach of Islam and politicization approach of Christianity, we have to convince others that it's not there. Historically, we can prove that about after hundreds years of Islamic rule, we are still 15 or 20% in this country, or Christians are still 2%, less than 2% in this country, despite so much. Historically, we can prove, but there are doubts in the minds of the people, and we have to remove this doubt very seriously. Therefore, they bring in the issues like love jihad, four marriages, more not following family planning, things like by Muslims, etc. And all these things bring all mistrust and lack of communication and lack of dialogue. So therefore, such issues which are really bothering the mind of the majority community. I am at the moment in agreement with Mr. Rahman Khan that there are certain deliberate attempts on the part of certain political groups to create this division and create a doubt. But there are certain genuine concerns of
I think Dr. Saab has put his view. And now I invite Brigadier Syed Ahmad Ali Saab, who is former Vice Chancellor.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be speaking in a forum where Reverend John
Mr. Khalid Ansari, am I over?
Sir, in fact, there was some disruption, so I thought I could continue with. If you want,
I just take one more minute to finish, then Mr. Brigadier Ahmad Ali can come over. Now, one more point I want to say that this has to be at a cultural level. Lot of cultural mixing should be there. It should not be, we should not depend on a political or other level, but cultural mixing between Hindus, Muslims and Christians should be more encouraged. I think it will lead to more better dialogue. Then finally, since the time may not be permitting me to go ahead, finally, I will request that more and more women groups should be involved in this interfaith dialogue. And more women groups should be involved in solving the real issues which are bothering the majority community. We must identify the issues bothering majority community, address them in our interfaith dialogue, and don't discuss on religious matters, etc. I hope I make my point elaborate. I made my point clear, and I hope other speakers, particularly Mr. John Doyle, respond to my point which I have flagged. Thank you very much for me giving this opportunity.
thank you, Dr. Syed Saab. I request Brigadier Saab to continue his.
Good evening. I'm extremely delighted to be speaking in a forum where Reverend Dr. John Dayal is also present, besides my mentor, General Zamiruddin Shah. It is really a matter of honor that we have distinguished panel like Mr. Rahman Khan and so many other speakers who are present this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, I grew up in a Catholic school just like General Shah, where I spent 11 years of my childhood amidst Jesuit priests. They had a deep influence on my psyche, on my mind. Before I could explore the world of Islam, I knew quite a lot about Christianity. It was but rational to inquire more and more about Christianity and Islam together. As my faith in Islam grew, my respect for Christianity grew even deeper, and also my admiration. It is my teachers in my school, none of whom were Muslims, who shaped my mind and my career. I am immensely grateful to the Jesuit priests who looked after me. I learned to respect human as a creation of God, and hence trusted and treated in just the same way as I would like to be treated myself. The Quran clearly states that Christians and friends are friends of Muslims. It is not without reason that the Prophet, when his followers were hounded from Makkah, allowed them to go to Abyssinia, which was ruled by a Christian king. And the Muslims found a safe haven in Abyssinia. It is not without reason that Europe has opened its arms to the Muslims who fled from Syria, Iraq, or Afghanistan. Imagine 12 mayors of United Kingdom today are Muslims. 7 members of a football team in a Catholic country like Italy are Muslims. This shows the magnanimity of Christianity towards Muslim brethren. Yet something keeps going adrift off and on. The most abused word which I hear is the word called fundamentalism. The fundamentals of Islam are pure, very simple, and propagate peace. Those who are usually described as fundamentalists are the deviationists. Those who have left the path of Islam are truly those fundamentalists. I would prefer that if I offer my 5 times prayers or if I observe Ramzan, I may be known as a religious person. The West could not understand this. And this word, it kept specifically for the Muslims. Instances of brutality in recent years, what to talk of the Serbian war, recently what is happening to the Uyghurs, or what has happened to the Rohingyas in Muslim. But the worst of all is that back home, the manifestation of majoritarian majority, I repeat, majoritarian majority in India in recent years is a huge setback to the pluralistic and multicultural society which is ours. Muslims have been bearing the brunt of communal riots right from the time of partition. But when vicious and virulent propaganda is launched on the mainstream television or mainstream media, then there is no escape. When politicians or political leaders call upon mobs to sort out the issue by calling them on the road, then it is a worrisome picture. Our culture embraces beliefs, customs, rights, institutions. And at the time of partition, we had as many as 4,635 communities, not necessarily divided on religious line, but culturally, emotionally, practice and social practices. These30 crore people comprise 78% of the population. We, the minorities, are only 19.4% of the population. The de jure we, which is enshrined in the preamble of the Constitution, has somehow been fragmented we. It is not a uniform we. And that is because there is a varying level of income, health, education, and lately a division on religious lines. The problem, as I see, is selectivity. When we say Black Lives Matter, we at the same time use fairness cream. That is selectivity. When the lynching of a Muslim does not disturb the other person as much as the lynching of a Hindu monk, that is selectivity. When the azan on a loudspeaker is a problem, but a jarring DJ music on a truck which has got a Ganapati idol is not disturbing, that is selectivity. When 2 brothers caught carrying some meat are put under the National Security Act and the murderers are left scot-free, that is called selectivity. Gentlemen, and particularly Mr. John Dayal, you are a blessed voice of the nation. You are heard and respected. Let us work to close the gap between us and they. Let us once again try to become we. Let the chant of Jai Shri Ram be a call for piety and not a war cry for killing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brigadier Saab. Now I invite Mr. Faizi O. Hashmi Saab, who is a retired IAS officer and former Secretary, Corporation and Civil Supplies. Faizi Saab. Faizi Saab, you are there? Are you there, sir?
Faizi Saab has to unmute, I think. Unmute.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. A very good afternoon Mr. John Dayal and all the eminent persons here in the webinar. It's a pleasure to be associating on this subject, and quite a comprehensive coverage has been made by previous speakers. So I am quickly shifting my wicket slightly. I now want to talk of the constitutional position. So I would say that what we are discussing today is a set of human rights which are under threat. And so the major concerns for the minorities emerge from the aspects of safety and development. Safety itself would include life and liberty. And you know, life again would entail livelihood and life of dignity. Liberty means personal liberty as well as my vocation to do anything. I can take my cart to a neighborhood, sell my vegetables. I should not be stopped. And then the other is development, socio-economic development, partnering with all other communities, trying to improve my status in society. Now, this should have happened in routine. What is the problem? So the issue of safeguards. Now, I would say the Constitution provides the Bible of our republic that provides all the solution. Of course, Article 5 was under attack. Citizenship matter has been under attack, and now let's think of Article 14, 15, 21. They're very important, which provide complete protection to minorities against any encroachment, infringement on their rights. So Constitution has to be upheld whatever medium we adopt, whatever method we adopt, we must abide by the Constitution and insist that the Constitution. The other is, of course, the executive, the state. We'll talk of it little later. Meanwhile, what has happened is, what has brought us here is the current scenario, the scenario which is represented by a huge vilification, insinuation, othering of these certain communities, hate mongering. There's been a huge propaganda of calling some people anti-national and almost subhuman. So discrimination follows, boycott follows, threat of violence is meted out. So this is the scenario. I mean, it would be facile to say that it has not impacted the society badly, very adversely. The social fabric is under threat. The social cohesion we talk of is now weakened. So how do we move forward? What is the route? What is the way ahead? So the executive comes into picture, the state comes into picture. The executive must speak up. It must take action. It must show zero tolerance to human rights violations, to hate mongerings, to such insinuations. I mean, this could be the immediate short-term measure, but the long-term I am thinking of is very important, that how to educate our young people, how to tell them that the Constitution also provides fundamental rights. Along with fundamental rights, fundamental duties. Let us think of Section 51A. Especially, I draw your attention to subclause E and F. E talks of promoting camaraderie and bonhomie, and F talks of what you call, heritage and composite culture. So there is talk of common brotherhood, there is talk of harmony, there is talk of composite culture in the fundamental rights. We are not talking of it. Let the children be educated about it. Let every organization which deals with interfaith dialogues emphasize what is there in the Constitution, both right versus duties. And then, of course, I would talk of the citizenship values. That is again draws from the Constitution. What are the values which children must imbibe? So that, as I grow up, I imbibe those, internalize those experiences and learnings and become responsible citizens. We learn the aspect of respecting others' rights, not only our own rights. And of course, I draw your attention to another aspect, concluding part, that is that since ignorance of law is no excuse, law must be understood. At least some basic understanding of law is necessary. So why can't we prepare a compendium of law, national laws, and in a very simple language, in a language which can be understood by high school students? They should understand what are the basic laws of the country, so that when they take certain steps, they do certain things, they should realize, they should understand that this is in violation of law and they are likely to be punished. So while we would keep struggling for, image changeover and perception management, we should also make some of these concrete suggestions regarding abiding by the constitutions, sticking on the constitutional points, including rights and duties both. So with that, I would end up, because there are many speakers waiting, and I am thankful again for this August group to have invited me for this discussion and participation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I invite Nisar Ahmed, sir. He is former president of ICSI.
Good evening to all. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of IMPAR to discuss the topic of the day. Much have been discussed by all our speakers, honorable speakers in the past, and flagging the issues of on the subject. I am only restricting myself on the socio and cultural aspects and economic aspects, because this require a kind of dialogue, because other things have already been done and discussed, and I'm sure that our speaker of the day, the chief guest, Dr. Dr. Dayal, is going to now raise this issue and take up all those parts. But socio-cultural issues are the important one, which is the low-hanging fruits, and to empower the community and the human being. Now, in that context, the issue is here, the IMPAR has been now propagating and having a dialogue. And one of the agenda which we are going to discuss, that to create a kind of harmony amongst the society. And how you are going to deal with, that is the issue. With a lot of debate and discussion in the past, I was unable to attend that earlier speakers' discussions. But I think the second one in the row, we are going to much more to discuss on the issue with the different groups and different persons to chalk out our strategy for the purpose of inclusive growth with regard to our societal issues, because society issue is now important. Apart from religious sentiments that have been offered, societal part is very important, because now economy, unless we have our education, basic education, professional education, to which I have been associated with for the last 23 years, and having spent that much year with these institutions, which is of course managed by parliament, it's a parliamentary systems under autonomous body. And I've seen very closely this aspect going to be very well addressed once we are going to have our proper education systems, professional education, and empowering the society to take it forward. I'm sure today's discussion is going to be also take up, and I'm extremely happy to see our great person, Dr. Dayal, whom I have been interacting on and off in IIC. Of course, post-pandemic, he's not been seen in IIC, but earlier we used to have interaction, and he's very candid, having very clear approach about the taking together the various segments of society to show that is a oneness. And in this quest, I am very keen to see his thought process, today's discussion deliberation, how you are going to take the socio-cultural and economic aspects. I'm flagging 3 issues: socio-cultural. Of course, interfaith is our dialogue. Is there going to be an interfaith says one God and oneness. And once we have a one God and oneness is seen, I don't think there is any debate much more going to be. But slowly and gradually, we'll have to now come to the conclusion that yes, here is the issue, and there is no conflict, according to me. But there are elements in the part we have seen, and particularly off late for last year or so, a lot of issues are being now talked of in the print and electronic media. So we will not, for the time being, but my concern would be more of to touch upon and to push through this dialogue in this dialogue through dialogue series to have the socio and economic issues and political issues followed by. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity, and thanks to Mr. Khalid and IMPAR for inviting such a novel gathering here for having discussion for a 1 hour time. Thank you so very much.
Shukriya Nisar Ahmed Saab. Or now I'll invite Naz Asghar ma'am. Earlier I called her, that time she was not seen, but I see her now. Can I invite Naz Asghar ma'am? Naz Asghar Sahiba, you are there? Are you there? Okay, I'll now I invite Khushnuma Khan, who is lawyer, High Court, Mumbai.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Thank you so much for giving this opportunity, though I am not a very great speaker on these subjects but still it was something which was really exciting, and to hear the dignitaries and people who are experts. But I would like to make my very brief submissions. First of all, before getting into the interfaith dialogue, we need to understand what is the concept and power of dialogue. A dialogue is a form of discussion aimed at fostering mutual insight and common purposes. The process involves listening with empathy, searching for common ground, exploring new ideas and perspectives, and bringing unexamined assumptions into the open. A powerful dialogue can reveal a person's thoughts and feelings through his or her tone of voice and the way the words are spoken. So it all depends upon how we interact with each other, how we talk with each other, which creates an impact on the listener. Coming to the topic of interfaith dialogue, this refers to cooperative, constructive, and positive interaction between people of different religious traditions and faiths. As we must have seen earlier also, during the era of Mughal Emperor Akbar, he was one of the great followers of interfaith togetherness, with whom the tradition of religious dialogue touched a very new high in medieval India. He not only promoted the idea of religious understanding, but also institutionalized it by organizing discussions among representatives of various faiths to arrive at a common ground of unity. The most important feature of Akbar's efforts was that he turned the process of religious dialogue into a public campaign. Similarly, interreligious dialogue is also referred as interfaith dialogue, is about people of different faiths coming to a mutual understanding and respect that allows them to live and cooperate with each other in spite of their differences. It is though a challenge, a process by which adherents of different religions, traditions encounter each other in order to break down the walls of division. The objective of religious dialogue is peace. Interfaith dialogue is an increasingly popular response to religious conflicts and religious nationalism. While practitioners enjoy a variety of approach, the underlying purpose of all interfaith dialogue projects is to enhance religious tolerance and promote peace coexistence. There are a number of interfaith groups which have emerged across the globe. One of such is the World Conference of Religion for Peace, founded in 1970, which has dedicated itself to promote mutual respect and cooperation among the world's religions for the attainment of peace, justice, and harmony while maintaining respect for the diversity of religious and cultural traditions, inter-religious dialogues.
कंक्लूड कर लीजिए, 2 मिनट है आपके पास.
Interfaith dialogue can be an excellent way to heal divisions in society. Social science research indicates that having a positive, meaningful relationship with someone of a different background and learning about their identity correlates to viewing that person's entire group more favorable. There is a very Upanishads, there is a very saying, there is a very good saying, from ignorance lead me to truth, from darkness lead me to light, from death lead me to immortality, peace, peace, peace. The interreligious dialogue is all about peace. Religion and religious faith is not the biggest problem in the world, and in India, it is not an exception in this regard. The problem is that of competition amongst members of same species for shared resources. People are terrestrial entity and there is competition between social groups for the same resources that support human survival and existence. Hence, she or he has a tendency to compete with others while being part of a social group and tends to expand his or her territory to gain access for the natural resources and uses warfare as to a tool to expand territorial rights. Therefore, a fundamental motivation for human behavior and the motivation or drive comes from the perception of his economic condition. Historically, one has to understand how interreligious. Yes, sir. So, therefore, I am just concluding, sir.
Okay.
Therefore, when we look upon all these principles which interreligious faith has been followed, not from today, but it has been from the time the Mughal era, or maybe before that also, it may be existing into India. But over the period of time, due to several clashes, which has lost the very charm and effect, which is which has to be revived, so that we can live in peace and harmony. I could say that when I was a child, I used to see that how the religion and how all festivals of all religion were being celebrated, and we used to enjoy them. But now when we see that there is a communal disharmony entirely. We try to seclude ourselves from one religion to the other, from one person to the other. So there is somewhere a gap, which is a gap which has come up, which needs to be bridged, which can be only possible through dialogue. And I am happy then IMPAR has taken up this step and taken this process to bridge this gap, and I will be very enlightened and happy to hear from the chief speaker today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Khan. Now I request Javed Yunus Saab, who is a Saudi CISP and advisor to Aramco. Javed Yunus Saab.
Thank you, Khalid Ansari Sahab. Given the constraints in time, बहुत कुछ कहा जा चुका है. I think a lot of words of wisdom have come out in the earlier interventions. So I will restrict myself to welcoming our very eminent speaker, who I call the invincible and indefatigable Dr. John Dayal. The world knows him firstly as a human rights activist, then as a powerful minority voice, and last but not the least, as a crusader for his Christian community. More than coincidence, it is the contiguity of interests and perhaps vulnerabilities, as also history and theology that make Dr. John Dayal speak for both Christian and Muslim communities in India over time, also other minorities. I have followed with interest some of his writing and television. Dr. Dayal, I would, I recently read your piece on Harsh Mandey. It was very touching and evocative. While opinionating on a very potent human force, you have so intensely aggregated what ails our great democratic and supposedly a plural polity. I'm sure you know adequately and you've been briefed adequately about IMPAR, an idea which so well addresses a plethora of challenges facing the Indian Muslim community contemporarily. Dr. M.J. Khan anchors this initiative, which all of us endeavor to turn into an effective action platform. Now, given your proclivity to our cause, it is indeed a privilege to have you in our midst today. Once again, welcome and thank you for being here with us. Thank you.
Javed Yunus Saab. In last speaker, I will invite, before we listen to Dr. John Dayal Saab, is Saeed Sherwani Saab, who is the Managing Director of Sherwani Group. Saeed Sherwani Saab, आपका.
Sorry. Welcome, John Dayal Saab, ladies and gentlemen. I will not take a very long time. I have was hearing a lot of our speakers before. Only thing I want to tell Dayal Saab is that I'm very, very thankful to the Christian community, because I was schooled in a Christian school and my values were those that were taught by the Christian brothers. And not only me, but all over India, we all owe a huge debt to the Christian community for the contribution to the education in the education field of us all in India. It is very true that today we face a lot of discrimination that can be traced back to those who are in power today. The problem is that when I talk to my Muslim brothers and sisters, I tell them that we never voted them in, and therefore they will not go out because of our votes. When you have not voted somebody in, you cannot vote them out. They are here. All over the world, we are seeing right-wing parties and right-wing politicians taking over their respective countries, and India is no exception. The problem that lies is that many years ago, as a young man, I've heard some leaders from my community, in the case of Shah Bano, say that the Shariat is more important than the Constitution of India. This was said by the Muslim leaders in 1970s, in 1980s. Today, we have changed our tune and we talk about Constitution being supreme and not anyone's religious text. I would like to talk about Indian and Muslims and Indian Christians and our relationship. You have been a voice of human rights and have fought for all over these years for any human right violation of any community. How would you see, when you speak, please tell us, the faults of the Muslim community in the last 30 years? We can talk about others. We want to look within ourselves. There may have been knowingly or unknowingly mistake committed by the Muslim leadership or the Muslim community, which has led to this situation today. I am not going to at all doubt the intentions of those who are on the other side. But I would like to know that you, as somebody who belongs to another faith, where do you see the Muslim community lacking behind, and what do you think needs to be done? Number two, whenever injustice happened to the Christian community, I have not seen the Muslim community come out very strongly and stand by its Christian brothers. What do you feel about that? I feel that we were very happy in a cocoon. We would take out huge rallies when Iraq-Iran issue happened. We would take out huge rallies when other things happen in the Muslim world. But in our own country, we never stood together with our minorities either. Today, the way forward is that the minority communities and our Hindu brothers who have a secular nature need to get together to have dialogue among each other and find a way out where we can contribute to a progressive, modern, pluralistic India. So I would like to know from you, how do you feel about these issues? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sherwani Saab. Thank you very much. Almost all our speakers have given their views and have posed their questions also before our respected guest, Dr. John Dyal Saab. So it is a moment to welcome our guest, Dr. John Dyal, and listen to him patiently. Welcome, Dr. John Dyal.
Thank you very much indeed, Khalid Saab. But for the fact that you're not giving me coffee, I could well be in the Indian Islamic Center or at the Indian International Center amidst friends. There are very few people here that I do not know personally. And it's not just that I'm meeting them in the virtual world. I'm also happy to see very many Christians who have joined in. And I think that is also very encouraging. I'm particularly grateful to Rahman Saab, who is a very, very old friend, and to General Shah, a great spokesman, a ranking person, I would say. I would like to put in a certain series of caveats. I speak to you as my grandson's grandfather, not as a representative of Jesus Christ or of the Catholic Bishops' Conference. But I do speak to you as a citizen of India, equal, absolutely equal with you and with everybody else. I also speak to you as somebody who is religious, but also in a way can look beyond religion. In my own family, in my father's sons and daughter, they're married into the Hindus. Our children are married into Hindus, Christians of all varieties, and Muslims, which always surprises people when I say among my grandchildren and my grandnephews and nieces, there are Muslims. So I look at you as sisters and brothers, not just in faith, but in humanity. And because of this relationship that I have in my family, I've had occasion to look deep into families of Muslims, of Sikhs, of Hindus, and I discover that most of them are like me. They are all loving, not at all sectarian, not fanatics, not fundamentalists, not obscurantists. The vast majority of them are people like us. And that gives us a very solid base to work on. I also would like to tell you, I'm a great disbeliever, although I participate in formal interfaith dialogue of the sort that churches and Islamic groups and Sikh groups and Hindu groups and Buddhist groups and Jain groups and even the Baha'is hold, where 7 people come, each says or sings or chants a verse from his or her holy book. They pose for a photograph. They may not even eat what the other person has served, and they disperse. That is not a dialogue. That is not even trying to understand. That's a formality. And we must rise about such formal thing, such khanapurti, and see where we can dialogue. Many years ago, maybe 30, 40 years ago, I, under pressure of governments who were saying, you must dialogue, dialogue will end violence, dialogue will entail equitable distribution of resources. Somebody did mention resources. Dialogue would ensure that constitutional rights are guaranteed. And I asked a question: what dialogue and with whom? Because the dialogue on how the Indian diaspora, the Indian community, the Indian variety are to live together has taken place. It took place in the Constituent Assembly. It was mentioned, questions have been posed to me about Ambedkar, and I'll come to that in a minute. That dialogue took place, how we are to live together, collectively, in this new nation which has been born. All of us know, and some don't even want to know, the history of the freedom struggle. And it's a complex history. It is not a very pure history. There were strains in it. There were issues between communities. And that's why the roundtable conferences had the Christians, the Dalits, the Muslims, and the Hindus in a group which is not represented today. And the changes of it also reflect how society changed. They reflect what partition took place. We also don't reckon with the fact that the Constitution of India was written in two parts. The part written before the partition and the part written after the partition. The part written with Muslim participation, the part written without the Muslim participation because of the partition. And these complexities need to be understood when we find out that the Constitution, to be strengthened, needs also to be challenged. Unless you're challenged, it is like exercising. Unless there's a stress and there's a resistance, you can't really build yourself up. And then we become very diffident that we cannot demand rights. To demand rights would then be to express a lack of faith in the other. And therefore, with this caveat, I would like to come to the basic point. Where are we different from the rest of the world? Why the young lady said about the world and all the interfaith dialogues that are taking place. I spoke in Chicago at the World Congress of Religions. I was the last valedictory speaker some years ago. And that was, I put them in the context that discussions on interfaith dialogue outside India and discussions on interfaith dialogue, collaboration, cooperation, working together are two very different things. I am currently a researcher for many years on Islamophobia. When I used to speak about it last year, even as late as last year, people would say, shh, don't speak about it. Even in, say, Karwai Mohabbat, that was my main point, that Islamophobia will kill us. And then I used to spend the next 15 minutes explaining how it would kill us as a nation, not as individual groups. Islamophobia will kill us as Christians, as Hindus, as Muslims, as Sikhs, as Parsis, Baha'is, everybody, as a people. And I wanted to explain to them why I thought that. And the basic first differences with the rest of the world is that two major religions of the world are minorities in India. And Hinduism, which as a group is a minority elsewhere in the world, only in terms of diaspora, and doesn't exist indigenously, is the majority group here. That the fact that the law doesn't define Hinduism, the Supreme Court has fought shy of defining Hinduism, and those are contradictions, because if you don't define Hinduism, how are you going to define conversion? How does anybody convert from a religion which is not defined? And how do you then explain Ghar Wapsi? All those things we can always come back to later. But the fact is that when the world's major religions are minorities in India, the pressures and the pulls become very different. It becomes easy, for instance, to target Christians and say they're agents of the Pope, and therefore tarnish the whole Congress, because Sonia Gandhi was born a Catholic. What is her current religion? I don't know. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. But the fact is that the Congress, all of it, this 125 is criticized, demonized, and colored because of the current religion or the past religion of its current president. Islam also is therefore vilified for what happens outside India, not for intrinsically what the community does in India. And that is something that needs to be very carefully understood. I was going through data analysis, what people have done. The Facebook has admitted that 40% of the hate on it is against Indian Muslims, is Islamophobia, rabid Islamophobia. There's equal amount of insulting of women and Dalits and some of Christians. But Islamophobia is the major thing on social media, and it's now penetrating mainstream media. On TV, generals and others, I don't know where they learned it, are using epithets to explain their point of view, demonizing religion. And therefore, it is important to understand what is happening within the majority community. For most of us, to understand what are the statistics that enforce this, that made Mr. Modi come to power, that allows him to be in a campaign mode. And that allows him also to use the COVID curfew to override, to rewrite, or to silence the Constitution for the time being. That also allows the Supreme Court to remain silent. The fact that they are taking so much action against Prashant Bhushan is, I think, they will, I would say that without fear of being hauled up myself, they're going to repent it day after tomorrow. That's a fact. Somebody's car is having problems. But what are then are the issues between ourselves? What do we need to do? And I again point out, General Saab and I and Khan Saab, we were together in critiquing and analyzing Mr. Modi's education policy. COVID as a cover has been used, among most other things, most importantly, to undermine education. It is not to talk about the digital divide. That will come and go, and maybe we will be back to normal and classes will be held. The fact that even now education has been suborned and under COVID has been almost totally suborned. Lessons have been taken out which teach what we're talking about here, which teach gender justice, which teach citizenship, which teach camaraderie, which teach bonhomie, which also gave us an overview of what different religions mean. What are the sayings? What did the famous people, the founders say? What do the Holy Book say? Those chapters have been excised from school education. What are these children going to grow up in? Long years ago, in another dialogue with Pakistani friends, they said the Pakistani army officers and the Pakistani police are being brought up in a syllabus which has been rewritten, which doesn't talk of Akbar at all. Somebody mentioned Akbar, which doesn't talk of syncretism, which doesn't talk of the freedom struggle as we understand the freedom struggle, which talks of something that suited the regime of the day. We don't want that to happen here. We don't want our children to grow up understanding their worldview in what the regime of the day was them to think, and that is critical. It's also important, therefore, to understand how do we come together. This is not a theological debate. If I did not believe in the word of Jesus as the Savior, I would be an atheist. If I did not believe that this is a religion fit for me, I would be lying. I think it's a religion fit for me. If I did not believe in Christianity, I would be a Muslim, a Hindu, or a Sikh. So this is not competitive religion. We're not talking of your religion and there I'll go with Islam. Your religion to you, my religion to me. And the freedom of religion to everyone. Those who want to become Muslim, by all means become Muslims, or Christians, or Hindus for that matter, why not? But it is an understanding of not a common minimum program. There is no common minimum program. How can they be when we are talking of equality? Equality and justice are the common need for everyone, most so for Hindus. So there is no need for a common minimum program. We believe in the Constitution of India. Give it to us. Give us what the Constitution says. We have taken an oath on it. The general took it when he was commissioned. We take it every day. Give us what the Constitution allows us to, which is equal opportunity, a level playing field. What was spoken of, the guarantee of life, the guarantee of security. When I began saying, I'm speaking as my grandson's grandfather, it was projecting myself into the future. I want an India where my grandson Kabir can live with security. I've said it 100 times. How do we reconstruct the India where I was born for my grandson? That is what I'm duty bound to do, to try to see that the India, I was born before the Constitution was born. India was just about independent, if that. So we want to recreate that India back there. And that is, it is not going to be on whether Islam is superior to Christianity, is superior to Hinduism, is superior to Sikhism. It's not going to be on those things. So theology, theological debates, orthodoxy, which is misunderstood also as fundamentalism, these are not issues that are for us. It is how do we work together towards common goals? How do we work together for the rights of the Dalits, for the rights of the tribals, for the right of the forest people? How many of us, including me and you, sir, many of you, we should have been the ones with your rank and your education in the front line of the fight for the forest dwellers, the dhan, the jungle, the pani. Those are fights that are common fights for us, and that will automatically generate the body mass that is required to guarantee that we can safeguard the Constitution of India. I and Harsh Mandava traveled the whole country. We have seen, I don't know how much pain, visiting families where individuals were lynched. I have looked into more eyes of widows than anybody should in one lifetime. And the travesty of the law, that it's the victim that is punished. The brothers of the victim, the father of the victim, the same father who had bathed the body of his son, is now faces charges. His other sons, his living sons, are not only terrified of their life, they face police charges. The rule of law, which is what Nehru Guarantee does, is not there. How do we really work together to once again ask the government, please enforce the rule of law? It's a very funny request. We are requesting the Supreme Court, we're requesting the President of India, and we're requesting the government of India, the Prime Minister's office, the Prime Minister himself, please enforce the rule of law. Enforcing the rule of law is not imposing Section 144. It is ensuring that justice will be done. It is ensuring that if I commit a crime, I will be in jail. And if anybody commits a crime against me, he'll be in jail. No innocent will be in jail. And today, I do not have a survey, and if some survey were to be done, more innocents are in jail than are criminals in jail. And those are facts that we need to work together. The Pope himself has called for dialogue. He has said that communities must work together for the common good, for human survival. COVID offers us that opportunity. So many of you have praised us for our education and our work there. I marvel at the work the Sardars do. The moment there's anything, the langar, which is normally confined to the Gurudwara, is immediately opened out to everybody. I mean, that is sort of, at Shaheen Bagh, the poor Sardarji who had opened the langar is today being victimized. What has happened? Where is the rule of law gone? What is subordinate magistracy doing? What is the subordinate judiciary doing? What is the Supreme Court doing? Those are questions that need to be answered. Where do we then work together? And let me come to Rahman Sah's basic question. Ambedkar, I respect that man, even I would say more than Mahatma Ji. I respect him for what he was, not only just highly educated, but for his raw courage. He could challenge Manu. He challenged everybody, including Nehru, including Gandhi, including everybody else. That challenge, and yet he had to compromise. Once he was in the system, I was trying to go into the background of why do we have Part 3 of Article 341, which guarantees scheduled castes certain rights, but takes away those rights if the Dalit, who's oppressed for 3,000 years, wants to become a Muslim or wants to become a Christian. The moment he wants to become a Christian, he cannot fight for parliament, he cannot fight for panchayat, his scholarship is taken away, his wife can divorce him. Why did Ambedkar, who was still law minister, this is 1950, why did he agree to it? What does the cabinet note say? And Rahman Khan Sahab would possibly may have even seen that cabinet note. What came over him that he was so compelled? And I go back to letters that Nehru was himself writing, expressing his own anguish, his own helplessness, because the Congress of that time had a very, very strong, you could say, fundamentalist wing, a Sanghi wing, a Khaki stream, and they could weigh on him. President Rajendra Prasad was a point of view, and just now because of the Mandir crisis, we again are digging up history and finding out his Amarnath, his trip to Gujarat to open the new temple there, and Nehru's reluctance. And we're going to see that day after tomorrow in a manner. The same thing we repeated. History repeats itself, and we haven't learned from it. Where do we do? Somebody mentioned Muslims were not fighting the cause of the Christians. They were so busy, they were so stymied, so coerced. They couldn't afford to. The police would have cracked down on them. But were the Christians fighting the Muslim fight? No. In the Bavi Masjid, some nuts like me may be speaking, but the church itself was silent in a way. It should not have remained. And I think those are causes. when the other person hurts, and this is again Christ's teaching, it is not when you join him in joy, it is when you join him in his sorrow that you express your humanity. It's a common saying in North India, which I learned when I was learning Hindi and Urdu, which was saying that you may not go to a wedding, but do go when they are trying to bury somebody, go follow the janaza. And that is where we show our humanity, our humaneness, when we join each other in common struggles. And today, after Shaheen Bagh, we have seen, I was arrested also at on near Delhi. Yes. I'm about to be over. I was also arrested. I was in detention the whole blinking day. But the point was that defending the Constitution is the biggest common factor, the common point. Equality, economic distribution of, equitable distribution of wealth, those are joint fights. Feeding the poor is a joint fight. Defending natural resources, they are not sold off by Mr. Ambani or to Mr. Adani. Those are joint fights. Are we in a position today as church, as a Muslim group, as Sikhs, do we have the strength and the confidence today to come together on that conference? It's not a political form, but it is the socio-cultural political form to assert a right as citizens, to demand that education be restored to the great thing that Nehru built. As a child, little child, in a nursery school in Shimla, and I grew up in Kashmir, by the way, as a baby, we were taught about humanity. We were taught the dangers of Nazism, because World War II was not very much in the past, it was recent. We were taught how to live together. And in certain schools, at certain times, I was the only Christian, but the schools had that curricula. That curricula, even in a virtual world, should be restored. I think these are issues for intercultural, intercommunity, interfaith dialogue that needs to be done. We are not here to define equivalence or define common touchstones between religions. All religions teach love, but all religions on their flags have spots of blood. Each one of us, Christianity most of all, Islam together with us, Sikhism, Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism also, have taken part in butchery. India is a very peaceful place. It's the way the Lord Buddha attained. He was born somewhere, but he attained his divinity, his knowledge, his nirvana in India. But this is also a place where rivers of blood have flown in 47, in 2000, 1992, in 2002, in 2007 and 8, in Orissa, Kandamal. I don't want any river of blood anymore. And therefore, all my life, I've been working to see how we can live in peace and harmony. The dialogue cannot be with killers. The dialogue can only with people who believe in the rule of law, who believe in protecting the Constitution, who believe that mankind lives and dies together, not singularly. The white man will not live if the black man dies. The Brahmin will not live if the Dalit dies. Christians and Hindus and Sikhs and Buddhists and Jains will not live if the Muslim dies. Nobody should die. We should live together in love. That is what I believe in. And that's why I'm willing to risk my neck on this. I'm so grateful that you've had a dialogue where I've not had to recite the 23rd Psalm, the Teiswan Zabur, as you would understand, where I say, the Lord is my shepherd. He's everybody's shepherd. In God's eye, his sheep are equal, and he goes out to pick the weakest sheep. That's what a good shepherd does. Pick out the weak sheep, and the sheep live together against the wolf under the protection of the divine. God bless you all, my friends, and I'm so grateful that you gave me this opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Dr. John Dayal Saab. We have been enlightened with your views, and you have very rightly emphasized the need of coming together. Dr. M.J. Khan Saab is with us. I would request him also to say a few words, and then we can take the questions of the participants before we come to an end.
Thank you, Khalid Bhai, and thank you, Dr. John Dayal, for accepting our request. And though I could join late, but I could hear you almost your entire address. Very enlightening. Thank you very much. I think, Khalid, you can carry on with your question answers and formal vote of thanks. And I hope more such interactions should take place. I could also hear in the very beginning Rahman Khan Saab. Thereafter, I was on a travel from Connaught Place to home, so I could hear the second part of Dr. Dayal's. So thank you, Rahman Saab. Your intervention was also very, very enlightening that moment. 2-3 minutes I could hear. I could also hear Brigadier Saab speaking that time. So again, a very good intervention Brigadier Saab made. Only 3 speakers I could hear some part of the speeches. So thank you very much. And I think you can carry on with the question answers and formal vote of thanks. Dr. Dayal, we look forward to in-person meeting someday. I think now as the corona situation is getting improving, and I hope that another couple of weeks time, Delhi should be fine. So I think in-person meeting has a different meaning, more deeper things we can discuss. And subsequently to take forward some joint strategy for addressing some of the burning issue challenges that the nation is facing. It's not only Muslims, it's a society in general, because people are feeling pain, but it is not coming out as much on the surface because of the media is not interested in covering. So a lot more sufferings on the ground, because last 3 weeks I've been traveling to my home district, and then a few days I spent in Lucknow. Large number of people I met, and I could realize that the problem, suffering they have undergone in the last few months on account of what happened in terms of decisions, and but also little for a little longer period of time. So I hope there's a much more that needs to be done by civil society organizations, and you have been very vocal and active and very forming a broad-based coalition in terms of collective strength to actually take up some of the issues. So we hope that IMPAR could contribute a little bit in that efforts and be of some value to what concerned citizens have been facing and feeling about it. So thank you very much, Dr. Dayal. Khalid bhai, you continue, please.
Thank you, Dr. Anjaman sir. We can take few questions now. We'll be having 10 minutes time for these question answers, and then we will come to an end. Any questions?
I would like to ask Dr. Dayal.
नाम बताएं और question.
Khalid sir,
जी.
just one question to Mr. Dayal. Hello.
जी.
जी.
जी खान साहब जी.
Mr. Dayal, thank you very much. You have dealt my question, and also we carry the same view as far as we have great regard and respect for Dr. Ambedkar. He is the father of the Constitution. But as you rightly said, there are 2 parts of the Constitution. One is written earlier, and the next is after 47. What happened, everybody knows, is a part of history. On the mind, the concern now is whether the assurance given when there was a strong demand in the Constitution Assembly, are we not able to recollect the debates and debate what debate has taken place during the Constitution Assembly while assuring the minorities by the Constitution, entire Constitution Assembly, to give up the separate electorate and to join with the mainstream, and the Muslims minority, all minorities joined the mainstream, including the depressed class, and no less a person than Sardar Patel and Jawaharlal Nehru gave the assurance that the united India will be one, and the rights of the minorities will be protected. Now, is it not the time to remind the nation that this is the promise given by the leaders, the father, those who wrote the Constitution, and the Constitution, the Assembly, it is a sacred document. Should we not take up that question and propagate and ask the question to the entire nation. Do you now Patel statue with crores of rupees has constructed? Are they honoring Sardar Patel? Are they honoring Pandit Nehru? Is this the assurance? Otherwise, if they are not going to carry out the decisions of the Constituent Assembly, then they have no right to respect the Constitution. They have no respect for the Constitution. Mr. Dayal, no, we are not helpless. Yes, to some extent we are helpless because it is majority rule. And it is already predicted as early as 1930, and then draft constitution which Dr. Ambedkar presented to the Constituent Assembly before he became the chairman. He presented a draft constitution and he completely rejected the present constitution. The entire frame of constitution made by Dr. Ambedkar, which he has presented on behalf of the depressed class, is quite different from the constitution which you have got it. So, should we not debate it now? Is it a time for not debating that issue?
Khan Sahab, it would seem that only you and I want to focus on that. What has happened in the past 70 years has been that Ambedkar's contribution, including getting rights for the scheduled caste, has become a focal point only for the Dalits to work on and to continue to demand their rights very properly. Minorities, including you and I, the Muslims and the Christians, have not focused on the constitutional aspect of freedom of religion. We use it only when we want to protect the rights of our educational institutions. And then we go to the Constitution, the Supreme Court Constitution bench. And I was present in X number of times in the Supreme Court when it was ruling on the right to education, for instance, and you were also there in some of those. And the Supreme Court always says you have the right to run education institutions, but after you read the judgment, half the rights are taken away. So now we can only have 50% of what I'm trying to say is, I think the religious minorities have stopped looking at the Constitution as the source of their strength. And I think it is time that we go back to that, dig up all the data, educate our own people, educate the majority community. This is educate the nation and the world. That this is the Constitution that we, the people, give to ourselves. This huge assurance of God's protection. And that is very important. And I would entirely join hands with you and with every peace-loving person in India if we can set up a project group to go into this and convert it into pamphlets, booklets, social media, films, whatever you have.
We seek the question. We question the nation.
Absolutely.
We can take one more question. Thank you, Dr. Saab. We can take Mr. Harun Khan. Please unmute your mic before you speak. Mr. Harun Khan Saab, you want to say something? Please unmute your mic.
Thank you, Khalid sir. Thank you, Dr. Dayal. Actually, I joined a bit late, but I heard entire part of your discourse. I missed out what Rahman Khan Saab and other colleagues spoke. I think you are rightly stressed on all of us standing together for certain values. The problem here is what has happened over the last so many years. The entire ecosystem has been vitiated, and the major support for the minorities has been the majority. But the majority has now become something different, as all of us know, whether it is intellectuals, whether it is media, whether it is police, whether it is administration. How the virus has gone around, very, very difficult to reverse the process. I think it will need many, many years of work. I think I also see some role for Empire in that, and to reverse this trend. I have two issues, two ways of handling this issue, and I don't know how you are the person who can probably guide us and enlighten us this. One is the talking about constitutional values, which Rahman Sahab also spoke. We are only a minority people, we are talking about constitutional rights. When Steinbach people came with constitution, nobody believed them, that this is only something they are doing, smoke screen, they don't believe. Most of the majority of the people are now slowly going away from the constitutional values. So the one approach is the teachers. Now you tell all the good things about our syllabus has been taken away. slowly or rapidly or whatever manner in different states and NCERT and all that. In earlier discussion also we had this. So how do we create a constituency among the teachers? Teachers are involved in the process of constitution. Entire election business is done by the teachers. But how do we bring them to the philosophy of the constitution? They are be involved in the process of constitution, but philosophy of constitution is imparting constitutional values. So how do we approach those teachers? Because they are the teacher, the young minds, they can impart those values. And the number two, which I have been pleading for a long time, I think we must find some way. Forget about all reservation. We must have quote unquote some reservation in all schools when we have certain percentage of children from all communities, all faiths. I think that is the beginning of creating an interfaith. If you don't create that sort of atmosphere among the teachers and the pupils, I think future is going to be more difficult, and we need to work on that. So how do you see, sir, we going forward, whether we can take these two approaches, and how do you take these two approaches? Thank you, sir.
So at least three of us here have been pondering over this for the last 1 decade. Rahman Sahab, first of all, the general, and I, because we think that education, and not just education in a Christian school or a madrasa, but education in a government school, which is, the government is the biggest educator in the country. I mean, let us be no doubt about it. It has a school in every village cluster, a primary school. Good, bad, or indifferent is not the point, but it has a reach unparalleled by any particular religion. The government school, the government teacher is something that we have to focus on. And that's what we have been arguing and wondering among ourselves as we critique education policies over the last 10 years. And Rahman Sahab has spoken of it in Parliament. General Sahab has been involved when he was at AMU in working out a good critique of the last education policy. These are issues that we need to, I think we need a permanent standing committee on education, an interfaith permanent education standing committee where we continue doggedly with all the vigor at a command, all the resources at a command to focus on this, not just on pedagogy, on the training of teachers, on the curricula of the B.Ed courses, the other courses, the personnel, how they're recruited, their sustenance, their salaries, their job security. The teacher today is a very vulnerable person. Most of them are not permanent. The teachers in private schools are like servants. They sign on 20,000, they get 5,000. I think we need to work with them in their trade unions, we need to work with them in the pedagogical institutions, we need to work with them in the areas where they work in. And I think that will be an entry point into their minds and their hearts. I would propose to Rahman Sahab and the General that please do set up a standing committee. I would hope that you would be a part of the standing committee.
Thank you, sir. So we have Mohammad Asif from Oman. He has raised. I welcome.
Assalamualaikum, sir. Dr. Dayal, आपका जो speech, if I am allowed to speak in Hindi.
Why not?
Yeah.
I understand Hindi and Urdu.
आपकी जो speech सुनी for the youngster like us, it is really is enlightened us कि किस तरीके से मतलब law के अंदर वो सारे provisions रखे गए जहाँ पर minorities का और SC, STs और जितने भी tribes है उनके कैसे उनके जो प्रोटेक्ट किया जाए कर सकते हैं. मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है सर कि I don't think there's a huge gap as such a constitution as a law is concerned. I think we have very strong law. We have a great law all over the world. The major problem which I see is the implementation, the right implementation, the right spirit of implementation is the biggest challenge. My question to you, sir, as Empower, how and what are the suggestions you can give us how we can, add bit on a great implementation of the law. हम law को किस तरीके से implement करें क्योंकि मुझे नहीं लगता कि कोई बड़ी challenges हैं as a law. We got a great law, a great constitution by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and the people who have added value on that. My question is how we as people which added an Empower and the people with the right mentality, what we can do to have value addition in the implementation of the law. Because if you see in other countries, where the law is implemented very rightly, very religiously, things are better. They progress very better. So आपसे सर जानना चाहेंगे सर हमारे लिए क्या है कि हम कहना मतलब इसके अंदर इम्प्लीमेंटेशन को और एम्पावर्ड कर सके.
जी, लॉ और रूल ऑफ लॉ में थोड़ा सा फर्क है. लॉ किताबों में लिखा हुआ है, आईपीसी में है, सीआरपीसी में है, जो जिसके रूट्स आप कह सकते हैं कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में है. रूल ऑफ लॉ मानसिकता में है. क्या हम अब आजकल पुलिस टॉर्चर की बात है. हम क्या कहते हैं, हमारे घर में चोरी हो जाती है, जब पुलिस आती है हम उसको कहते हैं कि जिसने हमको अपने नौकर पे शक है, इसको मारो और इसे कबूल करवाओ. हम खुद उनको कहते हैं कि इसको थोड़ा सा टॉर्चर कर दो, ये सब कबूल कर लेगा. हमारी बहन बेटी के साथ कोई लड़का दिख जाता है, हम उसके खिलाफ पुलिस कर देते हैं. ये पीपल में, आई एम नॉट सेइंग मी और यू और एनीबॉडी एल्स, जो लोग हैं, हम में रूल ऑफ लॉ की जो नज़र हमारे में है उसमें थोड़ा सा खोट आ गया है. और हमारे में जब खोट आ गया है तो पुलिस वाले में, पॉलिटिशियन में, मैजिस्ट्रेट में और ज़्यादा आ जाएगा. जो लोग लॉ को इंटरप्रेट कर रहे हैं उनके नज़रिए में अगर खोट आ जाती है, सुप्रीम कोर्ट कहती है आपने मस्जिद के साथ 3 बारी गुनाह किया, दरवाजे तोड़े, स्टैचू रखी और उसको तोड़ दिया, आप 3 बारी गुनाहगार हैं, मगर तब भी आप इसको दहेज में ले जाइए. ये तो कानून तो साफ है, गुनाह किया जेल जाओ. उसको कैसे इंटरप्रेट कर रहे हैं, तो ये सुप्रीम कोर्ट की बात है. थानेदार कैसे इंटरप्रेट करता है, डिप्टी कलेक्टर कैसे करता है. तो रूल ऑफ लॉ ही तो हमको डरा रहा है. अगर रूल ऑफ लॉ पे हमको भरोसा होता, हम जानते हैं किताबी तो हमको, किताब में तो सभी को भरोसा है. रूल ऑफ लॉ को कैसे हमको दोबारा करें, उसके लिए हमको वो कलेक्टर चाहिए जो खड़ा हो सके, वो थानेदार चाहिए जो कहता है मैं नहीं करूँगा, किसी को गोली नहीं मारूंगा, वो एमपी चाहिए जो पार्लियामेंट में हल्ला मचा दे. जब तक ये नीचे से ऊपर नहीं आएंगे, और वो जज चाहिए कि भैया अगर ये करोगे तो मैं छोड़ रहा हूँ, मैं रिजाइन कर रहा हूँ. रिटायर होने के बाद सब बहादुर बन जाते हैं. नौकरी करते हुए जब आपकी नौकरी के ऊपर बनी जाए उस वक्त अगर आप बोलेंगे बहुत पावर आएगा. उसके लिए कॉन्शियस चाहिए, उसके लिए ज़मीर जगाना पड़ेगा, बोलना पड़ेगा. और वो मेरा ख्याल है उसी को हम जगाने के लिए ऐसे सेमिनार्स की ज़रूरत है. कानून की किताबें मेरे पीछे भी देख सकते हैं आप, अपने सभी मेंबर्स के आप देख सकते हैं कितनी किताबें हैं. उनको इम्प्लीमेंट करना है, उनको जज्ब करना है. हमारी धार्मिक बुक्स को भी हमको जज्ब करना है. हम वही नहीं कर पा रहे अपनी ठीक से, बाइबल को, कुरान को, गीता को ठीक से जज्ब नहीं कर पा रहे हैं. कानून वो तो हम पैदा उसके साथ हुए हैं, कानून हमने बड़े होकर सीखा है. ये जब तक हम अपने जीवन में कानून को नहीं ला पाएंगे तब तक मेरा ख्याल मुश्किल हो जाएगी. मगर ये लड़ाई लंबी है और इसको लड़ना बहुत ज़रूरी है. हमारी ही नहीं, जैसे मैंने शुरू में कहा था, ये मेरे बेटे की और उसके बेटे की और हमारी नस्लों के लिए बहुत ज़रूरी है. ये
हसन साहब का क्वेश्चन ले लेते हैं, उसके बाद इसको कंक्लूड करेंगे. कोई और क्वेश्चन होगा तो देख लेंगे. हसन साहब
जी, अस्सलाम वालेकुम. I am Hassan Ghayas from Dallas, USA. I have a point for Dr. John Dayal. The Harvard Divinity School have an initiative called Religions for the Practice of Peace. And I assume that Dr. Dayal is aware of it. The point I'm making is that if we have an initiative like that Harvard do, and I'm sure other universities do, if we can bring academia, and particularly the respected universities globally and also in India, to support a program like, which I find a very powerful concept, religions and the practice of peace. So how do we get academia to support this initiative? Because after all, they are opinion leaders. And I'm sure that Indian universities, the top ones, and top global universities could be brought into the fold. And that will create a lot of credibility for these initiatives. And it will also provide a lot of visibility globally to this important initiative of bringing peace through religious practices rather than bringing strife and violence through religion. So I would like to ask Dr. John Dayal if he sees that as a practical initiative that is worth following and implementing in the Indian context.
I think it's not only practical and powerful, it is, I think, the need of the hour. But the tragedy is that very few universities and autonomous colleges even have a chair for religious studies. The only religious studies that are done are in seminaries, where there's a paper on interreligious dialogue and understanding other faiths. And those are seminaries produce priests. They don't produce either intellectuals or even professors, unless a professor comes out and teaches Arabic or Hebrew somewhere else. I think Indian universities need to have interreligious studies and intercultural studies as part of their mainstream curricula, as part of their history, as part of their philosophy, as part of the social sciences, political geography. And I think that needs to be done. But if there is a solid chair, say in Delhi University or AMU or Bangalore or Madras Christian College, I think it'll go a long way in creating, if nothing else, a cadre of people, intellectuals, who will be able to take the argument further, both in reach and in time. I thank you.
Harvard,
I'll work on it.
Harvard have a divinity school, not just a chair, an entire divinity school that is several hundred years old.
Yeah,
so
does Princeton and,
yes.
and several others I could name.
So you could link up with Harvard Divinity School, for instance, and Princeton, and you could also bring in those academics who can lend their weight to promoting peace, using religion to promote peace, rather than using religion to promote strife and violence. And that is indeed the need of the hour. So I think a person like you has the credibility and the competence and the visibility to make such a thing happen.
Thank you, Professor. I think I do know very many professors of religion in several universities, both on the East Coast and the West Coast. I will broach them this subject. I'll be grateful if you and I could talk to each other on email.
Sure.
My email is very simple, john.dayal@gmail.com.
I'll share my email address with Mr. Ansari, and he can let you have it. And I'll be absolutely delighted to discuss this with you and try to find ways to take this forward, because I personally believe that getting academia to support such an initiative could be a game changer.
Thank you so much indeed. I look forward to working with you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Dayal Saab, for this very important webinar. And it is an honor for me also to be part of such a august gathering. And we come to conclusion of this webinar. I request my colleague Arshi Javed to propose a vote of thanks.
Audible?
Yes, Arshi.
Thank you, Mr. Dayal, for allotting us time from your busy schedule and speaking over issues of prime importance. Listening to you has been a cathartic experience. It also brings in, when you speak, you bring in a lot of experience that you have garnered over the years. We look forward to meaningful conversations, meaningful engagements that you and hopefully Mr. Gayas could plan, and IMPAR could coordinate accordingly with whatever you plan. I'm also very thankful to the fellow steering committee and executive committee members who took out time from their precious schedules and made this meeting a pleasant experience for all of us. I thank you on behalf of IMPAR once again, and good luck with your work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.